welcome to Salt. You might notice that we are in a different location than we normally are. Things might look slightly different. And that's because the woman that God gave me got up one day and decided it was time to move furniture.
Yeah, I haven't done that in a long
Well, it's
time.
been a while.
Definitely been several years, I'd say.
Yes, yes. It makes me think Doug Tallman is a friend of mine. I think they did it. Doug got in it every year. Every year it seemed like he was redecorating or moving everything around in him and Sandy's home. And, I don't know what the compulsion was, but yeah, we do it about every 3-4 years.
Yeah, sometimes we used to do it more often, but it's definitely been a while since
Been a
last
while.
time. And now I think back, I'm like, wait, why did I just have to do that? But it's working and it's something different.
Yeah.
And
It kind of keeps things, the energy different. And I guess they call it feng shui, feng shui. How's it said?
Feng shui.
What am I asking you?
I don't know.
Feng shui. Anyway, and it was a really good idea. So when we got it finished, maybe we'll do a wide shot and give you a picture of what it all looks like now. I think it actually is kind of cool.
today?
No. That's when we get it
I was
all
going to
finished.
say all finished.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
we
'cause
still
it's-
have
Yeah, we need to put the stuff on the
On the wall
wall
we're
and
thinking
and
about,
such. Yeah.
little carpet on the floor and stuff. So we'll get it done and then we'll show everybody what it looks like.
Yeah, be a week or two.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So today we're talking about, I guess, faith in a way, but
Waiting.
waiting
Yeah, waiting. Yeah.
for
Waiting.
a star to fall. If you're from the '80s, that was a
Oh.
'80s song.
Okay, so a couple weeks ago by now, I guess, Aspen was over at a friend's house, and then she gets in her car, and she's sitting there in the driveway before she leaves, and she hears this little voice run through her head that says, "Wait a minute when you get up there." And so she needed to drive through some country roads for a little bit, and then she would get to a stop sign that is sort of on a hill, and there she would pull out onto the main road. Well, she gets there and she looks to the right and there's a car coming. She looks to the left and it's clear. She looks to the right and it's clear. So now, ordinarily, obviously, when it's clear on both sides, you go. But she remembered, wait. So she waited. Just momentarily, all of a sudden, she said this big white truck comes flying out of nowhere at a very high rate of speed. And if she would have pulled out, more than likely she would have been hit and it wouldn't have ended up well, obviously. So only God knows the future. And Aspen could have followed what her usual plan was and pulled out what looked clear. But she didn't know. She didn't know the future, that truck would come flying around there like that. So it reminds me of the verse Jeremiah 29:11, which honestly for years has seemed so cliche because everybody uses it. You see it for everything, it seems like. This is one that says, "For I know the plans I have for you." And so we talked about Joseph last week, but this made me think of his story again. When God gave Joseph the 2 dreams about his family, about bowing down to him, God knew the plans that he had for Joseph, right? Not only did he know that his family would bow down to him, he knew what would happen from the time that he had the dream until the dream was fulfilled. And obviously he knew what happened into eternity over here and into eternity over there as well. But for Joseph, in his little finite world, he could, he knew this was here, he had the dream, and he believed it would happen. But obviously he didn't know how or when. So I looked it up on the good old internet. It says it was 22 years from the time that Joseph had his dreams until his brothers actually bowed down to him. Well, that was a long time to wait, especially since at age 17, Joseph had his prophetic dreams and was sold into slavery by his brothers. So he spent 13 years as a slave, and then some of that time was in prison. And until he interpreted Pharaoh's dream when he was age 30. So 9 years after getting out of prison, and after 7 years of plenty, and 2 years of severe famine, Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt to buy grain, and they bowed down to him when he was 39 years old. 17 to 39. that's a big age gap in there. So those words, I know the plans I have for you. Yes, God does know, and we can see some of that sometimes, but not all of it like God knows is going to happen. So when I was a kid, um, and some of you who may listen to several family stories that I've told recently, but one of them was how my dad got custody of us. Now, at least a year before that, if not several years, I don't remember because I was a kid, but I do remember my mom telling me about it after she had had the dream. And the dream was she was standing over here with my sister and I, and then my dad was standing over here and he was pumping away at one of those old-fashioned water pumps, and he was working and working and working and working and working, she said, and kept pumping and pumping and pumping. And then all of a sudden, my sister and I were not standing over here with her, we were standing over there with my dad. And she was like, and she kind of, she filed that away in her memory, and she told us about it. And then, of course, when it happened, it was clearly obvious that the dream had meant what it had meant, So because my mom had a dream like that, and a couple others that she told us about, I grew up believing that God could and does share the future with us through dreams, through two ordinary, average people like my mother and myself, and others like us that, people don't always talk about that stuff, but I'm sure it must happen to other people besides just my family, So I'm going to tell you about a dream, not what the dream was in particular, but about a dream that Brett had once. And sometimes he tells me a dream, and sometimes I'll write that down, because it'll be like, interesting. Because if he's going to tell me about it, it was something that was a little out of the ordinary, So I had written it down in a journal, and then it was about a year and a half later, and Brett had been unemployed for 5 months already, and there was 2 months left to severance pay. And so, you kind of feel like you're getting down to the wire on that one. And I picked up that journal from a year and a half before, and I was just flipping through it. I enjoy reading my older journals and just reading them, right, and seeing what I had written then. And I came to that dream and I read it. And since it was now past tense, I was like, oh my goodness, that explains exactly what happened to Brett when he lost his job, that whole scenario. And then I looked at the date and I said, wow, wait 1 second here. And so I pulled up a calendar on the internet, and I looked because I knew a certain date on there, and I looked and I said, that was 1 year, that dream, Brett had that dream 1 year to the day before he lost his job. And it was just interesting, and it was one of those things where it just really makes you realize how God was with you then when it was happening. He's with you now, and he's going to be there in the future, even though you have no idea what's going to happen, despite all your own little personal plans, right? But that sometimes it's a wait. For Joseph, it was a 22-year wait. For my mom, that one dream she told us about, I don't remember how long it was, whether it was 1 year or several years. And then Restream was a year and a half later when we figured it out. So yeah, and Brett has a slightly different story, but it was certainly waiting as well for what God had alluded would happen.
Yeah, mine wasn't like Joseph or anything in 20-something years, but, just to put it as shortly as I can. When I was 12, I had this experience, and I just felt I was called to be a youth pastor, a youth chaplain, teach Bible in academy. It was clear in my head. It was a great experience that I can tell the story sometime, but I was 12 years old, and I knew this is what God called me to do. So fast forward, I was a year later, and I graduate from college, and I don't get a job. I don't, I put, applications everywhere and resumes everywhere, and nobody hires me. And I was working as a waiter at a place called Bennigan's, and I was really good at it. I was a really good waiter, and it was a fun place to work if you've ever been to a Bennigan's. But I remember after I'd worked there a few years, and I finally graduated from college, and I, uh, I was going to go into my, what God called me, and I didn't get a job. And I remember pulling into the parking lot of Bennigan's after I had already been out for like a year, and sitting there because I had to have a job, and thinking, I can't go back in there because all the people. Then they were my friends, and I knew them, but they had all worked there for like 30 years. That was their life. They worked in this bar restaurant, and that was their whole, life. And it's like, I'm going to end up, sucked into this world. And I just sat there in the parking lot thinking, I cannot go back in there. I cannot go back to this. But then one of them came into work, and they saw me sitting there and like, oh, Brad, are you back? So I walked in and got my job back and worked at Pennigan's. And then I was there again, for the time. But I remember that was probably 2-3 years after I graduated. I didn't get a job, and people talk about depression, and we talk about what it feels like. I can say that was the time in my life where I understood depression, because I was the most depressed I had ever been in my life. I mean, so much so that it even surprised me in the middle of it, going, this is what depression feels like. When people talk about not wanting to get out of bed and this is what it feels like. That's where I was at. And then it just so happened after about, I think it was 3 years, I got a phone call from the principal at Madison Academy. And he asked, oh, you Brett Hadley? He said, yeah. And he said, well, you have a really good friend, and that's the only reason I'm talking to you. And turns out they had an opening up there for a Bible youth chaplain. And one of my friends had gone up and interviewed, and they were going to hire him. And they called him, and they hired him. And he told them after, when they called him to say, hey, we want you to come up, he said, you don't want me. You want this guy I know. And they were like, what? And he said, I'm going to give you his number. This is the guy you really want. And gave him my number. And so the guy's like, that's the only reason I'm talking to you, because the guy we were going to hire said to call you. And sure enough, so I went up there, interviewed, and got the job. And incidentally, they hired him as well for a different position. And we both ended up working at Madison at the same time. And it ended up being the best, amazing experience teaching I ever had for 6 years at Madison Academy. And that followed that 3-year depression. So it was that whole, I knew I was called, and I could not figure out why I could not get a job. I mean, anywhere. And then just at the right time, a divine intervention, and it ended up being the right place at the right time, and it was an amazing experience.
Yeah. But from the time you were called as a kid, 12,
Yeah.
to how old were you? Late 20s?
Mid-20s.
Mid-20s? Yeah. I mean, a solid more than 10 years.
Yeah, it was more than 10 years. That's true. Yeah, no, that's true. So I guess it is a little more like Joseph than I thought. But that was, again, waiting. I know they have plans, and they come when they're supposed to come. And so a lot of times, they don't come when we think they should come, but they come when they're supposed to come.
Yeah, I can tell part of that one dream. So we were living in Lincoln, and it was 2000. We'd been there a year, because it was 2016. I wrote it down, and there was 4 parts to the dream. But the second part of the dream was that we were going to be moving, but there were no U-Hauls to be found. It was so hard to find one. And turns out, when we moved in 2021, it was directly after COVID, and it was super, super difficult to try to find a U-Haul.
Yeah,
and anybody who was trying to get a U-Haul to take their kids to college and stuff like that, I mean, you could see them just pieced together, driving on down the road with this little U-Haul here and a bigger something there, and it was very interesting. And like I said, there was 4 things, and then a second part of it happened while we've been here. And so it's very interesting to see that kind of stuff play out, because that was 5 years, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 5 years. And who could make up that there would be no U-Hauls to have? That doesn't happen. You call up and you get a U-Haul, even if you have to go, over to the next city or something like that. You get a U-Haul. It's not hard.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
So it's all really just to go back to that text, that God says, I know the plans I have for you, and those plans happen. He's already had them planned before we were even born. They've already been in place, and they happen when they're supposed to happen. And sometimes the hardest part is just for us to wait in faith, knowing I know God's got the plan, and what it's supposed to be will be when it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, with that in mind, when it's supposed to be, we'll have stuff on the wall and be able to show you the rest of the new area here, at the right time. That's
Yes, yes.
so. All right. Well, I hope you had a good Sabbath.